South Africa's coastal areas are experiencing severe weather patterns. Just yesterday, a tornado tore through Durban's Inanda and Idube areas, leaving a trail of destruction. The Western Cape also has not been spared, with heavy downpours damaging infrastructure and forcing hundreds to abandon their homes. Professor of Climatology and Director at Global Change Institute at the University of Witwatersrand is Francois Engelbrecht, joining us now for a sense of what we are experiencing, particularly in our coastal regions. Prof, good morning to you, and I talk to you again on this phenomena of the weather conditions we are experiencing in the coastal regions. Is this something that is going to continuously happen, Professor? Or again, what are we experiencing here? Is it the El Nino weather pattern?
Good morning, Collie. Thank you for having me and for the opportunity to talk about climate and climate change once again. Yes, unfortunately, this is absolutely part of our climate future here in South Africa, and of our past for that matter. These extreme weather events that we see so often along our coastal areas. In fact, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2021 carefully looked at all the evidence available for South Africa and made an assessment that we can already detect a systematic increase in the number of extreme weather events, specifically intense rainfall events in the eastern part of South Africa. So we should remember we have east of us the Indian Ocean and the warm Agulhas ocean current. And that warm ocean is always available to fuel intense storm systems with all that heat and all that moisture coming from the Indian Ocean. And as we are warming up planet Earth and also warming up South Africa, of course the atmosphere is just becoming more and more capable to generate these intense storm systems. And there's more and more moisture available from the warm ocean to fuel these storm systems, especially along the KwaZulu-Natal coast and into the interior. So we have to become more and more adapted and more prepared to deal with these intense storm systems along the coastal areas.
Yeah. I think that the question, Professor, that many people are going to start grappling with is the frequency of these weather events. How frequent is this going to happen? We've just come from the April floods in KwaZulu-Natal. Here we are having experienced a tornado and then a very heavy downpours. The frequency of these?
The frequency is most certainly increasing. Let me also give the viewers a bit of background of what's happening right now. We have a big cut-off low pressure system that is moving in from the west to the east from the Atlantic Ocean into the Western Cape region. Yesterday when the tornado occurred, that system, its center, was just to the west of the Western Cape, over the ocean still. But that storm system was so powerful that it was capable to cause very strong northwesterly winds high above sea level over Durban and strong easterly winds at the surface. And that mixture of the wind changing its direction from being easterly at the surface and westerly higher up is the ideal environment in which tornado systems can form. And then with the warm Indian Ocean available even in winter time, it was really an ideal situation for an intense storm system, and in this case a tornado, to form.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the statistics, these really devastating flood events, the really big flood events in Durban, are supposed to occur naturally roughly once every 40 years. But because of climate change, there is now already research showing us that now these types of floods are occurring on the average once every 20 years. So the return period has certainly increased, which means that just means we can expect these types of events more frequently.
Yeah.
And it's a general consequence of global warming, more frequent intense storms, and we see this in so many parts of the world, but definitely also on the eastern seaboard of South Africa.
Yeah. Prof, while we talk about the wet weather conditions, there also are warnings in between. If you look at, for example, social media, there are those who are already talking about a very dry summer. That takes us to the question that I think we spoke about the last time. La Nina weather system versus El Nino. Give us the difference between these.
Oh yeah, that's so important for our country. So the La Nina weather system refers to the state of the Pacific Ocean being cooler than normal. And our previous 3 summer seasons were all La Ninas. And we know, of course, that we had widespread falls of rain across our summer rainfall region in the country. All the big dams are full. But now the system has changed. And now, since May this year, we have the opposite state in the Pacific Ocean, namely an El Nino event. El Nino refers to the state of the Pacific Ocean when it is anomalously warm. Now, El Nino does not really impact our winter weather because El Nino is it's always still very weak in winter time. But it's likely to intensify towards summertime. And gradually it's going to influence weather patterns across the world. It takes a few months for the influence of El Nino to reach us here in South Africa. But usually its influence is well manifested by summer. And the most likely outcome of our weather patterns this summer is that it's going to be a dry summer, above normally warm, and very likely also with intense heat waves and a high frequency of heat waves. So it just shows you, Colin, how adaptive we have to be here in South Africa. We have to deal with periods of intense rainfall, but then the following summer we have to deal with drought or below normal rainfall at least. That's another aspect of climate change, by the way. The system is becoming more variable. When the La Ninas occur, the storm systems are more intense than in the past. But when the El Nino events occur, our droughts may well also be more intense than in the past. Just think of that terrible drought of 2015-16 that we've had in South Africa. It was the last big El Nino drought. And we're hoping it won't be that bad this summer, but right now, we have to prepare for that possibility.
Sure. Let's come back to the current, Prof, and that's the La Nina weather pattern. That means wet weather. The countries that have experienced this, how do communities who live in those coastal regions, because it would appear those are communities that become worst affected, how have they adapted? Because I think that's the key word here that you keep referring to, adapting.
Yes, there's much to say about that. Just technically, let me mention that La Nina phase is now gone. So although we are now experiencing wet weather, especially in the Western Cape, that is not being attributed to a La Nina anymore. But to answer your question about adaptation in coastal communities, there are 2 aspects. The first critical aspect is early warning. So our early warnings, our weather warnings that we are getting from the South African Weather Service, specifically in South Africa, need to be as accurate as possible. And quite often these warnings are really timeless and they are good. But what about the uptake of these warnings in our most vulnerable communities? In April 2022, as you've referred to the terrible floods in Durban, more than 540 people died. And we need to think very seriously why we in South Africa have not yet developed a system or a tradition of evacuating people out of the path of harm. It's very difficult to see a tornado forming. You can basically predict that only a few minutes before the event. But large-scale flood events, such as in April 2022, can be anticipated 1, 2, maybe 3 days ahead of the action event. We need to learn to evacuate our most vulnerable people out of the path of danger. Those floods forcefully displaced 40,000 people in the Durban area. So why haven't we evacuated just the 5,000 most vulnerable people and saved more than 500 lives. Now, there are some wards in the Durban area where there were such systems in place. At least one community that I know about, the Quarry Road community, and there the people did respond to early warning, and many lives were saved. But we need to scale this up. We have so many people. We literally have hundreds of thousands of people in South Africa living below floodlines. And we need to improve our early warning systems, the accuracy of these warnings, but even more importantly, we need to have the trust of communities so that they are willing to respond to these warnings and evacuate when their lives are really in danger, as was the case back in April 2022. The other aspect, Koli, is about reducing our vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Climate science is clear. These events will occur more frequently. They will occur in a more intense way than in the past. Should we accept that we would always have thousands or tens of thousands of people being so vulnerable? Of course we shouldn't. It's about giving people safe land to live on. We know that's not easy. It's not cheap to do this. But if we can offer people safe land with access to water, transport to the city to compete for jobs, then you can convince a community to move to safer land. But of course, that also costs a lot of investment and money. It's also about getting the economy to grow. So you can see this long-term adaptation effort to make people less vulnerable. That's a very big question that, of course, goes far beyond the climate sciences. That requires a cooperation between government and communities and between so many sectors in our economy.
Yeah. Prof, let me thank you very much for that clear explanation. I mean, when it comes to adapting, there's so much that needs to be done. But I think what stands out for me, at least, are those early warning systems and their accuracy, which then leads to evacuations. Thank you very much. Professor Francois Engelbrecht is with the University of Witwatersrand.